I don't want your love, Olivia. I want your silence, and for you to stay alive. Liam growled, his voice like grinding stones. He didn't look up from the ledger on the scarred oak table. Outside, the wind howled through the jagged peaks of Blackwood Ridge, threatening to tear the shingles off the cabin. Olivia stood by the door, her fingers white-knuckled around the handle of a single, battered suitcase. The lace of her wedding dress was already stained with the red clay of the mountain path. And if I can't give you both, Liam finally looked at her. His eyes were hard, reflecting the cold steel of the hunting knife at his belt. Then this marriage ends the same way it started, with a funeral. You're here because your father owes me, and I'm here because I have nowhere else to hide. Don't make the mistake of thinking this is a fairy tale. The engine of the ancient Ford truck groaned one last time before falling silent, leaving only the whistling wind and the rhythmic thud, thud, thud of Liam's heart. He stood on the porch of the cabin he'd built with his own calloused hands, watching the dust settle on the gravel driveway. The air up here, 6,000 feet above the nearest town, was thin and smelled of pine resin and coming snow. It was a lonely smell. It was a smell he had grown to love. Until today, the door of the truck creaked open. A pair of white satin heels, entirely impractical for the jagged terrain of the Cascades, stepped out into the dirt. Then came Olivia. She looked like a ghost appearing in a forest of giants. Her wedding dress was a shimmering ivory against the dark, looming shadows of the Douglas firs. She was younger than he had expected, her face pale, her dark hair tossed into a chaotic nest by the mountain breeze. Liam didn't move to help her. He didn't offer a hand as she stumbled over a protruding root, her suitcase dragging behind her like a lead weight. He just watched, his arms crossed over a chest covered in heavy flannel. He was a man of stone and scars, and he had no room for the fragility she represented. "It's a long way up," Olivia said, her voice trembling as she reached the bottom of the porch steps. She looked up at him, and for a second, Liam saw something in her eyes that wasn't just fear. It was a desperate, clawing hope. It disgusted him. "You should have worn boots," Liam replied. His voice was a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. He turned and walked into the cabin, leaving the door open, not as a welcome, but as a necessity. The interior of the cabin was a masterclass in utility. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, currently cold. A small kitchen area with a cast-iron stove sat to the left. The walls were lined with books and pelts, the decor of a man who had retreated from the world and never intended to return. Olivia entered, the hem of her dress swishing against the floor. She looked around the dim room, her eyes landing on the single bed in the loft above. She swallowed hard. "Where do I—" "The loft is mine," Liam interrupted, pointing to a small curtained alcove near the hearth. "You take the cot. There's a chest for your things. There isn't much room for whatever finery you brought from the city." "I didn't bring finery, Liam," she said softly. She set her suitcase down. The sound of her using his name felt like an intrusion, a violation of the silence he had cultivated for a decade. "I brought what I could carry. The rest was taken." Liam stopped his movement toward the stove. He didn't ask who took it. He didn't need to. He knew the man who had sent her here, Elias Thorne, a man whose debts were paid in blood or in daughters. Liam had been a debt collector of a different sort once, a man who worked in the shadows of the military's most forgotten corners. Protecting Olivia was the final price for his own freedom from Elias's reach. "The rules are simple," Liam said, turning to face her. He stepped into her personal space, looming over her. He smelled of wood smoke and rain. "You don't go past the creek without me. You don't use the radio unless the cabin is on fire, and you don't ask me about my life before today. Do we have an agreement?" Olivia looked up at him. She was small, but she didn't flinch. "I have a rule too." Liam narrowed his eyes. "You're in no position to make rules." "Don't look at me like I'm the enemy," she whispered. "I'm just the one they left behind." The silence that followed was heavier than the mountain itself. Liam saw a bruise, purple and yellow, peeking out from beneath the lace of her collar. He felt a sudden, sharp pang of something he hadn't felt in years. Guilt. He masked it instantly with a scowl. "Dinner is at 6, he said, turning away. "Change out of that dress. You look ridiculous." He walked out the back door, the screen slamming shut behind him. He needed to chop wood. He needed to feel the jar of the axe in his shoulders to remind himself that he was still made of something solid, and not the crumbling mess of nerves that Olivia seemed to be. As the first swing connected with the cedar log, he told himself this was just a contract. 6 months. Keep her alive, send her away. But as the sun dipped behind the peaks, casting long, bloody shadows across the yard, Liam knew the mountain didn't care about contracts. The mountain only cared about what broke first. The first morning on Blackwood Ridge didn't arrive with a sunrise. It arrived with a gray, suffocating mist that swallowed the trees whole. Olivia woke to the sound of a rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape. She sat up on the narrow cot, her bones aching from the thin mattress. The cabin was freezing. She looked toward the hearth. Liam was there, crouched low, scraping out the ashes from the previous night's fire. He was dressed in the same worn work pants and a thermal shirt that stretched tight across his shoulders. He didn't acknowledge her. Olivia reached for her suitcase and pulled out a heavy wool sweater, one of the few things she'd managed to grab before her father's associates had arrived to escort her to the mountain. She pulled it over her head, feeling the scratchy comfort of it. "There's coffee in the pot," Liam said without looking back. "It's bitter. Get used to it." Olivia stood up, her feet bare on the cold wood. She poured a tin mug full of the black liquid. It was indeed bitter, tasting of burnt beans and iron, but it was hot. She wrapped her hands around the mug, watching him. "Do you ever leave to go to town?" "Once a month. For supplies." He stood up, his joints popping. He finally looked at her, and his gaze lingered for a fraction of a second on her messy hair before moving to the window. "The mist is thick. Don't go outside. You'll wander off a cliff and I'll have to spend my day dragging your body back up." "I'm not a child, Liam," she said, her voice regaining some of its strength. "I grew up in the city, but I know how to walk in a straight line." "Not here you don't," he snapped. He grabbed a heavy canvas coat from a hook by the door. "The mountain plays tricks on your ears. You think the wind is a voice? You think the creek is a road? Stay inside." He disappeared into the gray veil. Olivia spent the morning exploring the 4 walls of her prison. It was a clean prison at least. Liam was meticulous. Every tool was in its place. The books on the shelves were mostly technical, forestry, structural engineering, medicinal plants. But there were a few worn copies of poetry and old journals. She picked one up, but the spine was so fragile she put it back immediately. She felt like she was touching a piece of his soul he'd tried to bury. By noon, the mist hadn't lifted. If anything, it had grown denser. Olivia felt a creeping anxiety in her chest. Back in the city, there was always noise. Sirens, shouting, the hum of electricity. Here, the silence was a physical weight. It pressed against her eardrums until she felt like screaming just to break it. She looked at the door. "Stay inside." She thought of her father's face as he'd handed her over to the driver. He hadn't looked at her. He'd been looking at the gambling debts on his desk, his hands shaking. "It's for your own good, Livy," he'd whispered. "Liam is the only one they're afraid of." Who were they? She knew the names, but they felt like shadows. The men in the tailored suits who smelled of expensive cologne and cheap cruelty. She stepped toward the door. Just the porch, she told herself. Just to see if the world was still out there. She pushed the door open. The mist surged in like a cold tide. She stepped onto the porch, the air damp against her skin. She couldn't see the truck. She couldn't see the tree line. It was like the cabin was floating in a void. Suddenly a sound cut through the silence, a high-pitched warbling cry. It sounded like a woman screaming, far off in the distance. Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs. "Liam!" she called out. No answer. The scream came again, closer this time. It was primal, filled with an agony that made the hair on her arms stand up. Without thinking, Olivia stepped off the porch. "Liam, is that you?" She took 10 steps, then 20. The gray swallowed her. When she turned back, the cabin was gone. "Liam!" she shouted, her voice thin and panicked. Panic is a thief. It steals your logic and replaces it with a frantic, blind urge to move. Olivia began to run. She felt branches claw at her sweater, thorns catching her skin. The ground was slick with pine needles. She slipped, her knee slamming into a rock, and she tumbled down a short embankment. She landed in a heap, the breath knocked out of her. Above her, the mist seemed to swirl into shapes, monsters with reaching limbs. Then a hand, massive and terrifying, clamped over her mouth. She tried to scream, but it was muffled against a leather glove. A heavy weight pressed her down into the dirt. "Quiet!" a voice hissed in her ear. It was Liam. He was crouched over her, his eyes darting toward the trees. He wasn't looking for her. He was looking for whatever was out there. He held a finger to his lips, his expression one of pure, predatory focus. A few yards away, a shape moved through the mist. It was low to the ground, heavy and silent. A cougar. It paused, its golden eyes scanning the embankment, the steam rising from its nostrils. It let out another one of those blood-curdling screams. The sound Olivia had mistaken for a person. Olivia froze, her heart stopping. Liam's hand stayed firm over her mouth. She could feel the heat of his body, the vibration of his shallow, controlled breathing. In that moment, he wasn't the man who hated her. He was the wall between her and death. The cat waited for a long minute, then turned and vanished into the fog as silently as a ghost. Liam didn't move for a long time. When he finally released her, he didn't help her up. He stood, his jaw set in a line of iron. "I told you," he whispered, his voice trembling with a rage he was barely containing. "I told you to stay inside." I thought someone was hurt," she panted, her face streaked with mud. Liam grabbed her by the arm and hauled her to her feet. He didn't say another word. He marched her back through the mist, his internal compass unerring, until the cabin appeared like a beacon. He shoved her inside and slammed the door. He turned to her, his chest heaving. "You want to die, Olivia? Is that it? You want to make this easy for your father's friends?" "No!" she cried, tears finally stinging her eyes. "I just couldn't stand the silence. I thought you were out there." Liam stepped toward her, his shadow looming large against the wall. "I've lived in that silence for 10 years. If you can't handle it, you won't last a week. Next time the mountain calls, don't answer, because I might not be there to pull you back." He walked to the hearth and began violently throwing logs onto the grate. Olivia sat on her cot, hugging her knees, watching him. The tension in the room was no longer just about their marriage. It was about the realization that they were both hunted things, trapped on a rock in the sky. The bruise on Olivia's knee turned a deep, ugly shade of plum, matched by the one on her collarbone that she tried to hide with her hair. For 3 days, Liam spoke only in monosyllables. Eat, wood, rain, sleep. He was a man who moved with a brutal efficiency, his life a series of chores designed to keep the chaos of the world at bay. But Olivia was the chaos. She tried to be useful. She scrubbed the floors until her knuckles bled. She organized the small pantry. She even tried to cook a stew with the dried meat he provided. He ate it without a word, though she knew it was too salty. On the 4th evening, the rain began. A cold, relentless deluge that turned the yard into a quagmire. Liam sat by the fire, sharpening his knife with a whetstone. Shh, clink. Shh, clink. "Why did you do it?" Olivia asked. She was sitting at the table, mending a tear in her sweater with a needle she'd found in his kit. The whetstone stopped. Liam didn't look up. "Do what?" "Take the deal. My father said you owed him a blood debt from the war." "What does that even mean?" Liam's hand tightened on the hilt of the knife. The firelight played across the scars on his forearms, jagged lines that spoke of fire and steel. "It means your father was my commanding officer in a place that doesn't exist on any map. It means he pulled me out of a burning wreckage when he should have left me to turn to ash." He finally looked at her. His eyes were hollow. "I don't like owing people, Olivia. especially men like him. This marriage, this protection, it clears the books. Once the 6 months are up, I never have to hear his name again. And what happens to me? She asked softly. When the books are clear. Liam went back to his sharpening. You get a new identity, a bus ticket to somewhere flat and boring. You start over. Is that what you did? Started over? Liam laughed, a dry, hacking sound that had no humor in it. You don't start over, Olivia. You just find a place where the ghosts have a harder time finding you. He stood up and walked to a locked wooden trunk in the corner of the room. He unlocked it with a key he kept on a string around his neck. He pulled out a heavy, dark object and brought it to the table. It was a handgun, sleek, black, and lethal. Olivia recoiled. What is that for? The cougar wasn't the only thing in the mist the other day, Liam said, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. He began to disassemble the weapon with practiced ease. There were tire tracks near the creek. Not mine. Someone is scouting the ridge. Olivia felt a cold chill wash over her. How? Nobody knows I'm here. Elias Thorne has enemies, and he has friends who are worse. Someone talked, or someone followed the truck. He looked her dead in the eye. If they come, they aren't coming to talk. They're coming to take you back to use as leverage against your father, or to kill you to send him a message. He pushed the barrel of the gun toward her. I'm going to teach you how to use this. I don't want to learn, she whispered, her hands shaking. The mountain doesn't care what you want, Liam growled. He stood up, circling the table until he was behind her. He reached around, his large hands covering hers, forcing them toward the cold metal. Hold it, feel the weight. If I'm not here, or if I'm down, this is your only friend. His chest was against her back. It was the first time they had been this close without the threat of violence or the distraction of the cat. Olivia could feel the heat radiating from him, the steady, rhythmic thrum of his heart. For a second, the fear of the gun was eclipsed by a strange, electric tension. He was a stranger, a man who treated her like an unwanted burden. Yet his presence was the only thing keeping her from shattering. Squeeze, he whispered in her ear. Don't jerk, controlled, like you're breathing. Olivia closed her eyes, her finger resting on the trigger. She could smell the gun oil and the faint scent of peppermint on his breath. I can't. You can, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle for a brief second. You've survived your father for 22 years. You can survive this. He let go of her hands and stepped back, the moment of intimacy vanishing as quickly as a spark in the wind. He pointed to the wall. Practice the movement until it's a reflex. I'm going to check the perimeter. He grabbed his rifle and stepped out into the rain. Olivia sat at the table, the gun heavy in her lap. She looked at the door, then at the gun, then at the empty loft where Liam slept. She realized then that Liam wasn't just a mountain man or a soldier. He was a man who had built a cage for himself to keep the world out, and now she was inside it with him. She picked up the gun and aimed it at the door. Her hands were still shaking, but she didn't put it down. Outside, the thunder rolled through the valley like a warning. The loveless marriage they both expected was shifting into something else, a partnership of the damned, forged in the shadows of a mountain that was no longer silent. The storm didn't just bring rain. It brought a cold that seemed to seep through the very logs of the cabin, settling in the marrow of Olivia's bones. The wind shrieked through the eaves, a banshee's wail that made the flickering firelight dance in jagged patterns across the ceiling. Liam had been gone for hours, checking the traps, which Olivia now understood were sensors meant to detect more than just animals. When the door finally swung open, a gust of frigid air and spray hit the center of the room. Liam stumbled in, his silhouette a dark towering mass against the grayish-black night. He was drenched, his hair plastered to his forehead, his breath coming in ragged white plumes. "Close it!" he barked, his voice hoarse. Olivia rushed to the door, leaning her shoulder against the heavy oak to latch it against the gale. When she turned back, Liam was already at the hearth, his hands shaking as he tried to stoke the dying embers. He wasn't wearing his coat. It was draped over his arm, soaked through and heavy with mud. "You're freezing," Olivia said, moving toward him. "Let me help." "Get back," he snapped, but the command lacked its usual bite. He slumped against the stone mantel, his eyes glazed. For the first time, the mountain man looked small. He looked breakable. Olivia ignored his warning. She grabbed a dry blanket from her cot and draped it over his shoulders. As she did, she saw it. The reason for his distress. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, and beneath the fabric, an old scar, a puckered, angry mass of tissue from a long-ago burn, was inflamed and bleeding. The cold and the exertion had reopened a wound that should have been dead a decade ago. "Liam, you're hurt." "It's nothing. Just the cold. It makes the old iron ache," he muttered. He tried to stand, but his knees buckled. Olivia caught him, her small frame straining under his immense weight. She guided him down to the rug before the fire, her heart hammering. As the heat of the fire began to grow, Liam's shivering intensified. He wasn't just cold. He was in the grip of a memory. His eyes were open but vacant, staring into the flames. "The fuel lines! Elias, get the men out! The fuel lines are blowing!" Olivia froze. He was back in the war, back in the moment her father had supposedly saved him. "Liam, look at me," she whispered, kneeling beside him. She took his face in her hands. His skin was like ice. "You're at the ridge. You're home. Elias isn't here." His focus snapped back to her, sharp and painful. He grabbed her wrists, his grip tight enough to bruise. "Why did he send you? Of all the things he could have used to pay me back, why a girl who looks just like her?" "Like who?" Olivia asked, her voice trembling. Liam let go of her wrists as if they were red-hot coals. He turned away, staring into the shadows of the cabin. "My sister. She was 22 when the car bomb went off in Sarajevo. Your father, he was the one who signed the transport orders that put her in that car. He said it was safe. He said he'd check the route." The silence that followed was more deafening than the storm. Olivia felt the world tilt. Her father, the man who had played the hero for years, the man who had used this debt to force a marriage, was the architect of Liam's greatest tragedy. "He told me he saved your life," Olivia whispered. "He did," Liam said, his voice a dead monotone. "After he destroyed everything I loved, he pulled me out of the fire so I could live with the guilt. That's the thorn way, isn't it? Break a man's legs and then hand him a crutch so he's beholden to you forever." He looked at her then, and for the first time, the hatred in his eyes wasn't directed at her. It was directed at the ghost of the man who had brought them together. Olivia reached out, her fingers tentatively touching the scar on his shoulder. This time, he didn't pull away. "I didn't know," she said. "Liam, I swear, I didn't know." "It doesn't change anything," he said, though his voice had softened. "The wolves are still at the door, and I'm still the only one who can keep them out." He reached out and took her hand, not with the grip of a captor, but with the desperate strength of a man drowning. They sat there by the fire as the storm raged on, two broken pieces of a puzzle designed by a monster, trying to find a way to fit together in the dark. The morning after, the storm was unnaturally still. The world was encased in a layer of crystalline ice that made the trees look like glass sculptures. Liam had fallen into a heavy, feverish sleep on the rug, and Olivia had spent the night tending the fire, watching over him like a sentry. When the sun finally peeked over the eastern peaks, Liam stirred. He didn't say a word about the previous night's confession. He simply stood up, winced at the pain in his shoulder, and began his morning routine. But there was a shift. He left the handgun on the table instead of locking it away. "I'm going to the North Ridge," he said, his voice gravelly. "The sensors were tripped near the old logging road. If I'm not back by noon, lock the cellar from the inside." "Liam, wait!" Olivia called out as he reached for his rifle. She walked over to him, her eyes searching his. "Be careful, please." He looked at her for a long beat, his thumb tracing the wood of the rifle's stock. "Careful is for people with something to lose, Olivia." "You have me," she said, the words out before she could stop them. Liam's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. He just stepped out into the blinding white light of the ice-covered mountain and vanished into the timber. Left alone, The silence of the cabin felt different. It wasn't oppressive anymore. It was an invitation. Olivia knew she shouldn't pry, but the revelation about his sister had cracked open a door she couldn't close. She went to the locked trunk in the corner. The key was gone. Liam was wearing it, but she noticed a loose floorboard beneath the edge of the chest. She pried it up with a kitchen knife. Beneath it lay a small, leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. She sat on the floor and began to read. It wasn't a diary. It was a dossier. Liam had been tracking her father for years. There were photos of Elias Thorne meeting with men in dark alleys, transcripts of intercepted phone calls, and most shockingly, a map of Blackwood Ridge with extraction point, marked in red. But it was the last entry that stopped her heart. Thorne thinks he's hiding her. He thinks he's using the marriage to keep her safe while he liquidates the accounts. But the Van Ev syndicate doesn't want the money anymore. They want the blood. If they find the ridge, I can't hold them off forever. I have to tell her the truth before the clock runs out. Her father didn't send her here to be protected. He sent her here to be bait. Olivia felt a wave of nausea. The marriage wasn't a debt payment. It was a distraction. Her father had used her as a lure to draw the Van Ev syndicate away from his own hiding place, knowing Liam would fight to the death to protect anyone under his roof. She wasn't a bride. She was a human shield. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the valley. It wasn't thunder. It was the unmistakable sound of a high-powered rifle. Olivia scrambled to the window. In the distance, near the North Ridge, a plume of birds erupted from the trees. Another shot rang out, then a third. Then, a silence so profound it felt like the mountain itself had held its breath. "Liam!" she screamed, though she knew he couldn't hear her. She ran to the table and grabbed the handgun. She remembered his instructions. The weight, the breathing, the squeeze. She checked the magazine just as he'd shown her. She didn't feel like the fragile girl in the lace dress anymore. She felt like a woman who had been betrayed by the world and was finished being a victim. She threw on her heavy coat and stepped onto the porch. The ice crunched under her boots. She scanned the tree line, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm against her ribs. A figure emerged from the shadows of the firs. It wasn't Liam. It was a man in tactical gear, a suppressor on his rifle, moving with the cold precision of a professional killer. He saw her and raised his weapon. Olivia didn't think. She dropped to one knee, using the porch railing as a brace, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil barked into her shoulder, the sound deafening in the still air. The man stumbled, his shot going wide and shattering the window behind her. He dived for cover behind the ancient Ford truck. "Olivia, get down!" Liam's voice came from the side of the cabin. He appeared from the brush, his face streaked with blood and soot. He fired a burst from his rifle, forcing the intruder further back. He scrambled onto the porch, grabbing Olivia by the collar and hauling her inside. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his hands frantic as he checked her for wounds. "I'm fine," she gasped, her ears ringing. "Liam, my father, the journal, he used me as bait." Liam froze, his eyes meeting hers. The truth was out, and there was no time for apologies or explanations. "I know. I'm sorry, Olivia. I was going to tell you today." "How many are there?" she asked, gesturing toward the window. "3 more, Liam said, reloading his rifle. "They're Van Ev's men. They aren't scouts anymore. They're the cleanup crew." He looked at the handgun in her hand, then at the fire in her eyes. A grim ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You did good, Olivia. Now stay low and stay behind me. We're going to show them why you don't hunt on Blackwood Ridge." The cabin, once a sanctuary, had become a fortress under siege. Liam moved with a terrifying fluid grace, extinguishing the lamps until the only light came from the dying orange glow of the hearth. He moved to the back of the cabin, kicking open a hidden panel in the floor. "In," he commanded. "There's a tunnel that leads to the storm cellar. It's reinforced. If they get through the door, you lock yourself in and don't come out until you hear my voice, and only my voice." "No," Olivia said, her voice steady. "I'm not hiding in a hole while you fight them alone." "Olivia, this isn't a game. These men are professionals." "So am I," she retorted, holding up the handgun. I'm the bait, remember? If I'm in the hole, they'll just burn the cabin down to get to me. If I stay here, we have a chance." Liam looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the steel that had been forged in the last week of isolation and fear. He nodded once. "Fine, but you stay in the kitchen. Use the cast iron stove as cover. If anyone comes through that back window, you take the shot. Understand?" "Understood." Outside, the first grenade detonated. It wasn't a frag grenade. It was a flashbang. A blinding white light seared through the cracks in the shutters, followed by a roar that shook the foundation of the cabin. The front door groaned under the weight of a breaching ram. Thud! Thud! Liam took his position by the hearth, his rifle leveled at the door. "One more!" he shouted. The door splintered on the third hit. 2 men in black tactical gear burst through the opening. Liam didn't hesitate. The cabin erupted in a chaos of gunfire and smoke. He took the first man down with a shot to the chest, but the second man dived behind the oak table, returning fire. Olivia crouched behind the stove, her heart hammering so hard she could taste copper in her mouth. She heard glass shatter behind her. She spun around. A third man was climbing through the kitchen window, his boots kicking aside her pots and pans. He looked at her, a cruel smirk visible beneath his mask. He raised a serrated knife, thinking she was an easy target. Olivia didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. She remembered Liam's voice in her ear. "Controlled, like you're breathing." She fired. The bullet caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell back through the window with a cry of agony. Olivia scrambled forward and slammed the heavy wooden shutters closed, barreling the latch just as a flurry of bullets peppered the wood from the outside. "Liam!" she called out. "I'm okay," he yelled back. He had moved from the hearth to the center of the room, his combat knife in hand as he struggled with the second intruder who had rushed him. The 2 men were locked in a brutal, silent dance of strength. The intruder was younger and faster, but Liam had the weight of a decade of survival behind him. He slammed the man against the stone fireplace, the sound of bone hitting rock echoing through the room. With a final, guttural roar, Liam twisted the man's arm and sent him crashing to the floor, unconscious. Silence returned, thick with the smell of cordite and spent shell casings. Liam stood over the fallen men, his chest heaving, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead. He looked at Olivia, who was still holding the handgun, her knuckles white. "Is it over?" she whispered. Liam walked to the window and peered through a slat in the shutters. The mountain was dark again, the snow beginning to fall, covering the bodies in the yard with a pristine white shroud. "For now," he said. He turned to her, and the distance that had defined their marriage since the day she arrived seemed to vanish. He crossed the room in 2 long strides and pulled her into his arms. Olivia collapsed against him, the adrenaline fading into a wave of exhaustion. He held her tight, his hand stroking her hair. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her ear. "I'm so sorry I let him do this to you." "We're not his pawns anymore, Liam," Olivia said, pulling back to look at him. Her face was smudged with soot, but her eyes were clear. "He wanted a distraction. Let's give him a war." Liam looked at the woman he had expected to be a burden, the young bride he thought would break. Instead, he found the only person in the world who could truly stand beside him. "The truck still works," Liam said, his voice turning cold and calculated. "We leave at dawn. We're not going to wait for the next wave. We're going to find your father." Outside, the mountain wind howled, but inside the cabin, the silence was finally gone, replaced by the low, steady hum of 2 hearts beating as one. The loveless marriage was dead. In its place, something far more dangerous had been born. The pre-dawn light was a bruising shade of purple when the ancient Ford truck roared to life. Liam hadn't slept. His eyes were rimmed with red, his movements stiff from the previous night's combat. He'd loaded the bed with extra fuel cans and a crate of gear that looked more suited for a battlefield than a mountain getaway. Olivia sat in the passenger seat, the handgun tucked into the waistband of the sturdy denim pants Liam had unearthed for her. The ivory lace of her wedding dress lay in a scorched heap in the cabin's fireplace, a sacrifice to the gods of their new reality. "The main road will be watched," Liam said as he shifted into gear. The truck lurched forward, tires crunching over the fresh layer of snow that hid the bloodstains in the yard. We're taking the firebreak trail. It's narrow, steep, and if the ice hasn't set right, we'll slide into the gorge. You ready? Olivia looked at the cabin as it receded into the mist. It had been her prison, then her fortress, and for one brief, terrifying night, the only place she'd ever felt truly seen. I've been sliding toward a gorge my whole life, Liam. At least this time I'm in the driver's seat. Metaphorically. Liam glanced at her, a shadow of respect softening his rugged features. He didn't speak again for 2 hours. The descent was a harrowing exercise in precision. The firebreak was little more than a scar on the mountainside, choked with fallen timber and slick with runoff. Twice, the back end of the truck fishtailed toward the precipice, and twice Liam's steady hands coaxed it back to safety. As they reached the lower elevations, the pristine white of the mountain gave way to the dismal gray of the valley. The air grew thicker, smelling of wet asphalt and industrial exhaust. They were entering the territory of men who fought with lawyers and ledgers, but who were just as lethal as the cougar on the ridge. We need to ditch the truck at the trailhead, Liam said, pulling into a dense thicket of alders. They'll have the plates logged on every highway cam from here to Seattle. They moved on foot, bypassing the small mountain towns where gossip traveled faster than the wind. Liam led them through a series of dead zones he'd mapped out years ago, places where the surveillance state went blind. They reached a small, nondescript garage on the outskirts of the city by dusk. Inside was a black SUV, clean and fueled. You have a backup for everything, don't you? Olivia asked, watching him check the vehicle's underside for trackers. When you live with ghosts, you learn to keep a door open, Liam replied. He stood up, wiping grease from his hands. Your father is at the Mercer estate. It's a fortress. He thinks the Vanevs are satisfied with the bait he left on the mountain. He thinks he's won. He hasn't met the woman I became this week, Olivia said. Liam stepped closer to her, the cramped garage smelling of oil and rain. He reached out, his thumb brushing a smudge of soot from her cheek. Olivia, when we get inside, things are going to get loud. Elias will try to talk his way out. He'll try to play on your memories. Don't let him. He didn't just betray me. He betrayed the idea of a father. I know, she whispered. The distance between them was gone, replaced by a shared gravity. But he's still the man who taught me how to walk. I just have to show him I've learned how to run. Liam nodded, his jaw set. He didn't offer a platitude. He offered his hand. They climbed into the SUV, leaving the silence of the mountain behind for the screaming neon of the city. The hunter and the bait were coming home, and they weren't looking for a reconciliation. The Mercer estate was a monument to ego. Glass, steel, and high-tensile wire nestled in the hills overlooking the sound. To the world, it was the home of a philanthropist and businessman. To Liam and Olivia, it was a spider's web. Liam didn't use the front gate. He drove the SUV through a section of the perimeter fence he'd compromised months earlier during his scouting missions. They moved through the manicured gardens like shadows. Liam's suppressed rifle held low. Olivia followed his lead, her heart a steady rhythmic drum. She felt an odd sense of calm. The fear had been burned out of her on the ridge. They entered through the library's French doors. The room was silent, the air-conditioned chill a stark contrast to the humid mountain air. Sitting behind a desk of polished mahogany was Elias Thorne. He was sipping scotch, looking at a series of monitors. On one screen, a satellite feed of Blackwood Ridge showed the cabin, dark and silent. I expected you to be dead, Liam, Elias said, not looking up. The Vanevs are usually quite thorough. You underestimated the mountain, Elias, Liam said, stepping into the light. And you underestimated your daughter. Elias froze. He turned slowly, his face aging 10 years in a single second as his eyes landed on Olivia. She was wearing a tactical jacket, her hair pulled back, the handgun visible at her hip. She looked nothing like the socialite he had sold down the river. Livy, he breathed, his voice cracking. Thank God, I had to do it. It was the only way to clear the path. I was going to come for you once the accounts were settled." "With what, Dad?" Olivia asked, her voice cold and resonant. She walked toward the desk, ignoring the frantic way his eyes darted toward the alarm button. "With the money you made by letting Liam's sister die? Or the money you saved by using me as a meat shield?" Elias stood up, his hands trembling. "That's not— Liam, you've poisoned her mind. I saved you. I pulled you from that wreckage." "You put me in that wreckage," Liam roared, the suppressed rage of a decade finally breaking through. He leveled the rifle at Elias's chest. "You leaked the route to the Vanevs 10 years ago because you wanted to eliminate the competition and emerge as the sole survivor who could broker the peace. You killed my sister for a seat at the table." Elias turned pale. I didn't mean for her to be in the car." "But you let it happen," Olivia said. She was standing inches from him now. "You let a girl die, and then you used her brother's grief to turn him into your personal guard dog. And when the bills came due again, you tried to sacrifice me to the same people." "I did it for the family!" Elias shouted, his face turning a frantic shade of red. "Everything I built was for you." "Then watch it burn," Olivia said. She reached out and took the glass of scotch from his hand, pouring it slowly over the ledgers on his desk. The door to the library burst open. 2 of Elias's private security guards rushed in, but they stopped dead when they saw Liam's rifle and the look on Olivia's face. "Drop them," Liam commanded. The guards looked at Elias, then at the man who looked like he had stepped out of a nightmare. They dropped their weapons. "The Vanevs aren't coming for us, Elias," Liam said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I sent them a gift before we left the trailhead. I sent them the encryption keys to your offshore accounts. They don't need leverage anymore. They have your soul, and they're coming to collect." Elias collapsed into his chair, the weight of his sins finally crushing him. He looked at Olivia, searching for a spark of the girl he used to know. He found only the mountain. "Go," Elias whispered. "Just go." "We were already gone the moment you handed me that suitcase, Dad," Olivia said. She turned her back on him and walked toward the door. Liam stayed for a moment, his finger on the trigger, the ghost of his sister finally finding a moment of peace. Then he followed her out into the night. They were 200 miles away, parked on a bluff overlooking the Pacific, when the news broke on the radio. A gas leak had leveled a prominent estate in the Seattle Hills. No survivors were reported. The Vanev syndicate had been efficient, as always. Olivia stood at the edge of the cliff, the salt spray misting her face. The sun was beginning to rise, a pale, hopeful gold against the blue of the water. She felt light. For the first time in 22 years, she didn't belong to a name or a debt. Liam walked up behind her. He had changed into clean clothes, but the scars on his arms and the hardness in his eyes remained. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, a silent sentinel. "You knew, didn't you?" Olivia asked, not turning around. "About the accounts. You'd been planning that for a long time." "Since the day I found the first piece of evidence," Liam admitted. "But I couldn't move against him as long as he had his hooks in you. I needed a way to get you out without him suspecting. The marriage, it gave me the legal right to take you to the ridge. It gave me the time to finish the dossier." "So the loveless marriage was a rescue mission?" Liam turned her to face him. His hands were calloused, but his touch was surprisingly gentle as he cupped her face. "It started as a mission, a way to settle the debt once and for all. But then you arrived, and you weren't the fragile thing I expected." "I changed," she said. "And we both did," Liam replied. He looked out at the horizon. "The ridge is still there. If you want to go back, or I can take you anywhere else. The bus ticket I promised. It can go to any city you want." Olivia looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the man who had fought a cougar and an army for her. She saw the man who had carried the weight of a sister's ghost for a decade, and still found room to care for a stranger. "I think I've had enough of the city," she said. She reached up and took his hand, her fingers interlocking with his. "And I think I've had enough of being alone." Liam's expression broke then, a small, genuine smile that transformed his face from a mask of stone into something human. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. The wind off the ocean was cold, but the heat between them was enough to ward off any winter. "The cabin needs a new window," he murmured. "And a better cook," she laughed softly. They stayed there for a long time, watching the sun climb higher into the sky. The world below them was full of noise and shadows, but up here, on the edge of everything, there was only the truth. They were no longer a mountain man and a bride. They were two people who had survived the dark and found the light in each other. The loveless marriage had been a lie, but the love they had forged in the fire of Blackwood Ridge was the only thing that would ever be real. Life doesn't always give us the beginning we want, but it gives us the strength to choose our ending. If Liam and Olivia's journey through the shadows of Blackwood Ridge moved you, please consider sharing this story with someone who needs to know that even the deepest scars can heal. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more cinematic tales of heart, suspense, and the unpredictable twists of fate. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon.